Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the And Both podcast. My guest is Sangheetha Parthasarathy. She is a Harvard Med School and MIT entrepreneurship graduate. In 2019, she was recognized as one of the top 100 global healthcare leaders at the International Forum for Advancements in Healthcare. She is also a UPenn Social Strategy Fellow and co-founded a nonprofit called Chennai Birth Network that focuses on pregnancy and birth choices. So after a very successful tech and strategy consulting career at Oracle, Accenture, and Adobe, Sangheetha found her life's calling through the birth of her own daughters, one of which was a home birth. All of her work sits at the intersection of systemic inequality, feminism, birth, and attachment, and she helps facilitate healing and growth in the realms of relationships, sex, pregnancy, and postpartum, careers, and weight loss. So today, Sangheetha is a nervous system coach helping successful high achievers overcome perfectionism, workaholism, and stressaholism through nervous system regulation and power wound healing as they dare to be unapologetically authentic, confidently owning the boardroom, bedroom, and playroom while deepening the connections with the people they love most. I could have talked to her forever. The thing that I think was really interesting is that we both have gone through the immigration process coming to America, and she now has since she went to Europe and then moved back to India, but just navigating immigration and parenthood and all of the work that she does in the nervous system realm with healing. And it sort of one of those conversations where you start to connect a lot of dots that you didn't necessarily maybe think about in that kind of way before. So she does incredible work and she has such a vast experience in so many different ways that it's really fascinating to sit and have this conversation. So I hope you enjoy, and here she is. Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Hello and welcome to another episode of the And Both podcast. I am here today with Sangheetha, and welcome. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be here. I know I've followed the work for a while and I've been, a listener of the podcast for a while. So very excited to be here today with you.
I love that. That makes my heart so happy because, it's when you put these things out in the world, it's hard to know like who's hearing them and who, unless people write in or unless, the listenership sort of explodes, you're like, is anyone out there? So it's always amazing to hear. But this is not about me. This is about you. And we're going to talk about you. So tell everybody about you, because I read through your bio and I'm not even entirely sure how to summarize any of that. So tell people what you want them to know about you.
Yeah. So my name is Sangheetha Parthasarathy. I'm a nervous system coach. I am a somatic trauma therapist. And short summary, I guess. I grew up in India and spent my early life in the US, worked in tech, startups, SaaS, moved to the UK, did more, sales, strategic pre-sales, strategy consulting, and then became a mom, got very interested in birth work. So I quit my job and I became a doula, worked in maternity. And that's how I found, trauma and nervous system and somatic work. And, fast forward all these years later, I've built my own body of work. I love working with deep thinking, deep feeling, busy women. And I help regulate your nervous system, essentially.
I love that. And we can all use that, right? Like if it's not the things that are going on in your home, it's the things that are going on in the world. I feel like everyone's nervous system has been a little bit of a frayed cord the last couple of years, specifically.
Agreed. I think that's one of the things when we talk about the work is we tend to be all self-care and all of that. And it's like, hold on a second. There's like I don't know, am I have to swear on your podcast? Like a literal shitstorm that's going on outside. And, it's, I think, really hard for us, to kind of somehow separate that from us. And, I definitely feel like community care is being, yes, we need self-care, but we need co-regulation. Right? We need to be talking to each other and be kind to each other. And I don't know, be closer than ever before, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, it's easier, right, than ever. Like, you're in India right now, and I am in the US. And I just think that is super cool to have, to be able to have the conversation. And also, the experience of you're literally halfway around the world, and there's similar things that you are experiencing that I experience. And, we're not anywhere near each other, just in terms of like motherhood and business ownership and all of those pieces.
Absolutely. And that's the amazing part about, the internet and the interconnected nature of our work, is that I think everything is global these days, right? It's so amazing. I think, in what you're building and in what I'm building. And the amazing thing is that while I'm building a body of work called, South Asian somatics and immigrant and rerooted nature of, how it affects the nervous system, every time I do something that specific, I swear without fail, I have, women that say, hey, I know you're talking about this population, but, 90% of what you're experiencing, I'm experiencing. And so I can relate to it. And I think it's just beautiful, like the interconnected nature of, and it's easier now than ever for us to all come together and hold space for each other. And so, as much as what's happening in one part of the world essentially is literally happening to every one of us in our bodies, it feels like it's also easier for us to kind of reach out and be supported and offer support.
Yeah. And I mean, you're also navigating, so, having companies and, changing careers and all of that stuff. You've immigrated twice, right? To the
Yes.
US and then to the
And I'm
UK.
repatriated now. So yes, there's lots to talk about there. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so your kids were born in the UK. So when you were in the US, it was you. And then
And my
how,
then partner for a little bit, and then we moved to the UK. Yeah.
so how is that? What's been your experience kind of on the immigration side and parenthood? Because that's a big cultural shift.
Wow. Oh God, yes. I think that's a topic on its own. I think I've said this many times before. I think immigration and movement, migration of whatever kind, is a big event on the nervous system, right? Right down to the food, the gut, the microbial world that we interact with, and how it affects hormones, the nervous system, and all of that. But I think that immigration presents a lot of challenge, even when you're in a partnership, or even when you're looking for love, things like that. Because I think also it depends on where and how you immigrate and all of that. But I think there is the thing that I want to mention here is that there is a example if you're Indian, like if you have an Indian passport and you're in the US, for example, it can take, I don't know, 25, 30 years to like physically get a new passport. And that's that's a big amount of time where you are essentially tied to your employer, and you're sort of like this one foot out the door with the anxiety of not knowing when things will happen, but putting your life on hold for that to happen. And so this is not like I lost my job for 3 months, the acute stress or trauma or whatever, right? Or I had like a bad boss for 3 months, right? Or I fell down and hurt my knee. These are like shock trauma, single events. But imagine living with a baseline activation anxiety for years on end. And the process is sort of like a black hole, right? So there are things that but then, those dates that keep moving up and down, it's anybody's guess, right? Unlike in the UK, where the day you land, whatever the immigration rules are, that's what you're going to be judged against. So there is a level of certainty there. At least you know that this is black and white. So if those rules change, that's not for you, right? So you can plan your life around it. But this is not the same for if you're talking about the US immigration. So you come in as a student, that's the F1 visa. And then if you want to work as a student, you get like a buffer sort of time. And that's changed now to where it's a little more time, which is good. But then you get on the H1B, which is the employer sponsored visa. And it's the employer that sponsors your permanent residency. And it's that piece where a lot of people get stuck in it for years on end, really not knowing when those dates are going to be, you know? And so I think imagine living and you know this. So it becomes so there's uncertainty in all of those things, and thereby, one of the things it's not conducive to is running a business. There are ways to run a business, in that sort of scenario, but there's that. And then, I mean, we moved to the UK. That gave us a visa. I think that there it's a little bit different how you start up and work. And so I think when I met my husband, he was in London and I was in New York, and this long distance was going on for a while, and we were like, okay, this is hard, and what do we do? And I think. And I am not saying that this is the same for everybody, because I think a lot of people come to the US with the intent of building a life there and sort of almost being in that 30, 40 year, 30 year, 25 to 30 year, whatever. So then you immigrate and then your children have a better life, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's that thing between freedom and autonomy. So then I know it's like, what's easier? And obviously it's a much better place to have children. I worked for Accenture at that time, and they had very generous maternity benefits. Both times I got by US standards is very generous with both my children. So so we optimized for that at that point, and then travel and visa and all of that. And it's like and it's 75 to 7 years. We all got our passports, and then we lived in Britain for a while, and then we've repatriated here to India. And this has allowed me to actually run my business, to be honest, because I think you had more support here. There's no visa anxiety here. You're done with all of that almost, right? And so I think you'll also see immigrant women starting up slightly later in life because of all of these just, teething troubles. That's changing now, and that's great to see. But I think entrepreneurship and motherhood also depends on all of these things as well, right? And so, that's kind of been my journey.
I mean, I think it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't had that experience of like being in limbo. And I know, like, you and I have talked before this, and I was born in Canada, and then I moved to the US in high school, and I came here on a student visa. It was tied to my dad for his work visa, and then we applied for a green card in August of 20. Well, we applied a month before 9/11.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's, yeah. So what happened was, it was actually a couple months before 9/11. So we had gone through the process of, you have to go to the doctors and you have to get interviewed, and there's this whole thing, right? And then the applications were submitted and everything shut down.
Oh,
So it took me 7 years to get, at least 7 years to get a green card.
wow.
When the process normally that. So I lived in this limbo, but I was going to college. I was getting married. I was, so like forever, all these things were happening in my life. And then you have this, like, every once in a while, some letter from Customs and Immigration shows up, and you're like, what's in here? Who knows?
Yeah.
There's no
Yes.
clear step.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, like,
that.
you're trying to like have a life, and you're trying to
Yeah.
build a life. And you're
Yeah.
not even sure if I mean, now Now the political climate is a little
Oh
bit
God.
wonky because before everyone used to joke like, "Oh, Canada and the U.S." and I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
it's getting a little spicy now with with everything that's going on." Like the joke is not a joke anymore.
You
But
got
yeah, I
our
know
guy.
that. Like
What?
I can, yeah.
Mark Carney out of
I'm,
England. And
yeah.
I
Yes,
mean,
exactly.
Britishers love him, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but to add to that, what happened was I was there for my master's, and then they had applied. So I went for my master's, and I got an internship, and so I was working part time on like, so there's the CPT, which is like the part time small internships, and the OPT, which is like the post work thing, and then so the same company gave me a full time job, and I could work in that interim period full time. However, and then they applied for my H-1B. However, my thesis defense took 2 months later. So they applied for me in the general quota, which is the 65,000. And then there was, at that point, 20,000 for the advanced degrees. So the master's and the PhDs, etc., which I would have qualified for had I not missed there are other things going on, why I couldn't defend my thesis. And my professor was wanting to get tenured at that time, so he wanted us to publish 2 or 3 journal papers. And journal papers take their own time to like process things. And so it's sort of like we were under pressure to do that before we would be allowed to defend. And then that
Mm-hmm.
put my immigration thing. I know these are details, but I think it's important to tell the story of how. And I had to go home, right? And my thing was, I didn't want to go home on somebody else's terms. Like, I wanted to go when I was ready, and not because of all of this, which was not under my control. And then there was, I, I studied some more, I stayed in school in order to stay as a student, and then eventually got my visa and all of that. But the uncertainty of, I had a one-way ticket booked, like literally. And then, 2 days before I was about to get on a flight, my friend and I were like, no, let's do this our way. Like, yeah, if I leave, I want to leave on my terms,
Yeah.
sort of. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a student. And then I eventually, got into the job market. And then that's when the recession hit for me too. So then my company was not applying for anybody's green card at that point. And then, so, I was on the H-1B, but also I think for me, what I'd seen, and this is like how do I say this in a non-traumatic way, is when you're in that limbo where your employer is applying for your green card, you do spend many years sort of being indebted to your thing, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I would call it modern day slavery, but maybe that term is too dramatic. I don't know. But it is that, because if you change your employers until a certain time, your clock sort of resets. And therefore, what's the incentive to, it's like a softer form of being indebted to the same place, right? And that
Yeah.
was very daunting for me. Luckily, it didn't get there, because at that time I met my husband and we had all these conversations, and I kind of opted out of the green card race entirely, but I know that that's privilege, right? And, because I was working for a company in New York that was setting up my customer success team in the UK. So my boss said, do you want to go there and head it up? And I was like, sure. And then, my company sponsored the UK visa, which is a lot more straightforward, and the rest is history. But the point, there is so much like life is going on in one, like you find somebody, you get married, you have the children, you buy the house, right? And then there's this
Mm-hmm.
going on where it's always one foot out the door. The best way to describe it is, until I got my British passport, I would always keep my LinkedIn updated. I would always respond to recruiter emails, whether or not I was looking for a job, just to keep them warm, because that could happen at any point,
Yeah.
right? Like there was a bit, all the while feeling like, okay, I want to do something on my own. And then I did eventually, but yeah.
Yeah, it's that level of uncertainty. So I became a citizen this past fall. I've been here for 25 years,
Mm.
and I can honestly say, like, when that was all done, like when the paperwork was all done and signed and ceremony and all that stuff, I didn't realize how that is this sort of always on the back burner feeling of I'm here legally. I have a green card. I've had a green card forever. I had 4 children in this country. I am married. I own a business, like all of these things. But how tenuous it really felt until, the ink is dry and someone hands you an American flag and things like that. And it's like, this is, I didn't expect to feel that level of like exhale, I guess, in that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. So I have family there, my sister, and I remember this time when she became a citizen, it was more numbness, sort of relief rather than just this jubilant, celebration. Same thing. And the other thing is and I have a lot of my friends there and family there, and you're raising Americans. You're right. And there's that going on. And then the children, you're different, family wise. I mean, traveling on different passports is just a nightmare when when you're
Yeah.
traveling with children and going through separate queues and being asked all these questions. And, our last names don't match. I mean, these are small things, but I think the complexity, So all of my children, both my children have the same last name, but my husband and I don't have the same last name. And so every time we go through irrigation, we carry their birth certificates, etc. But imagine, like, there was a period of time where we all had different passports. Like, it wasn't even in the same queue,
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, that was me, like, forever and ever. It was US citizens would go one way, and this we traveled for the first time in February since I got it, and we were all in line together to go through customs when we came back from our trip, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." Like,
Yeah.
hey, because
This
normally, I'm
celebration.
right. It's a celebration of logistics, let's be
Yeah.
honest. Like, I don't
Yes.
have to be over there with my kids one of my kids screaming that they want to be with me and me having to be like, I'm actually not of this country yet.
Yeah, I
So,
know. And
but
waiting
it
in
was,
line and breastfeeding. And I remember when they were young too, it's like, yeah, which way do I go?
yeah. And
Yeah.
also too navigating, like, we're talking about immigration that involves like lawyers and sponsorship and things like that. Like, there's a ton of stuff that is going on in the world right now that is not of that. It's not in that lane. We're talking about people who are trying to leave countries that are not safe for them or their family to be in. They're talking about people that are trying to get into countries so that their family can be safe. And, you know, without jumping into a massive like geopolitical moment, having families get separated and having, people not know where they're going, having people put on a bus and, in Texas and winding up in the middle of Manhattan, like all of these things, when we see it on the news or when I see it on the news, I'm not as removed as like my US born neighbors, understanding that like the the I don't know. It's like the only thing I can think of is like it's not solid ground. It's just squishy.
No,
Like everything
it's
feels like
not solid
quicksand.
ground. I agree
And
with that
so,
completely. I agree with that.
yeah,
We're living in extraordinary times, and we do have to acknowledge the geopolitical times that we live in because it impacts all of us every day, right? In different ways, right? And every day I wake up and I go to the news being like, okay, what's happening today now? And even, yeah, exactly, right? And then also, like I said, we're all living like, my family is global and I worry about that. And I think the real hardship, and this happened in COVID when, families that were traveling for vacation got separated for 3 months. And that's really hard. And now we're living in these times where I think there's a very real anxiety about for yourself, but also your loved ones. And you're absolutely right. It is shaky ground. And therefore, I don't think we can layer any kind of self improvement or therapy or mindfulness or mindset or whatever it is without really acknowledging this, right? I mean, the ground beneath us is shaky right now. And then we're all sort of trying to survive on one hand and also thrive on the other. So, some days it looks like head in the sand. And some days it does look like, okay, I am actually looking around and it is unsettling. And, let's find, an essential humanity for us to connect and co regulate with. And this is where I feel like, I don't know if you see this, but sometimes when you see very sort of declarative, like sort of directive things on social media, that really fills me up. It's like, okay, it's not something you could just breathe your way out of.
Yes.
And for me, it's this sense of, and look, now I'm here in India and it's not directly affecting me, but it is, right? I think when you're seeing geopolitics play out like that, it triggers an essential sense of helplessness and powerlessness and things being out of control, which you have felt for a very long time, right? Like as a woman, the gender, the immigration, the visa status. And I think it just takes you back to that all that time where things were felt shaky, essentially, right? Even if,
Mhm.
like right now, I mean, no ground is solid in the world right now, but I'm comparatively slightly away from all of that, like the actual, whatever's happening. But it still reminds me of all those shaky times. I feel like, I think that's the hard part. It's what's happening today, but it's also how we survived. I think it's kind of going back to survival patterns.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I love what you said. Like, we can't breathe our way out of it, because I think that what happens is, there's a whole, I gave this presentation last week about self-care and, the self-care industry and the health and wellness and, the trillions of dollars and all that stuff. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, like, if you don't have a way to not get back down to zero when you're talking about feeling activated or feeling completely triggered by everything that's going on around you, no level of work, whether it's breath work or whatever, all of these things that people talk about, and all of these different strategies that people use, there has to be a solid foundation in order to be able to incorporate those things into your daily practice and into your life. Because if you don't, I mean, all of that stuff is great. And everyone is an individual, and so what works for me is not going to work for you, and the person down the street, and all that stuff. But there has to be a foundation with which you sit on to be able to use that stuff. So I do like that you brought that up, because I mean, that's what you do, right? That's the work
Yeah,
of trauma.
exactly.
And yes.
Exactly. Exactly. Trauma, nervous system, your amygdala is like firing, right? Saying danger, danger, danger. And then either everything looks like danger and you've been in that state for a very long time. And therefore, sometimes you shut down and then actual things are not dangerous, right? And that's the kind of the sad, sometimes when you see, and I don't, it's not like one way or the other, but I think the way to restore is not to be solution. I mean, it's not a magic pill. And, I think we've, to the whole wellness industry, and it's, we're all playing the same game and nobody's off the grid and doing something different. We're all trying to kind of make our way in the world, build a business in, mainstream terms. And so I want to acknowledge that. However, I think far too often wellness has also become very consumerized, packaging, magic pills, one size fits all, because that's scalable, whereas that human connection isn't, and so I think all the people in this world, as business owners, but as well as people that are navigating these, I think we have to find that balance between the scaling, this, the widgetizing and the consumerizing, and promising very sort of tactical solutions based things. And there's a place for it, don't get me wrong, but I think what we're trying to say here is much more. It's not this hyper individualistic, I can sort of make a performance sport out of healing and turn that into my full time. And I'm going to speak therapies, with my friends, and I'm going to alienate everybody because I'm going to then feel morally superior that I'm doing all this work. It's not that. I think it's just sitting with very uncomfortable, very vulnerable. I have no clue what's happening in the world right now, and I'm not going to pretend to know. And it's uncomfortable, and I feel out of control. I think even just a space where we can say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus sort of trying to jump in and come on, see if we can offer widgets.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, right? Like we nobody likes to feel uncomfortable, and it's sort of this race to a band-aid, or it's a race to mitigating the discomfort as quickly as possible, and not efficiently, but as quickly, right? That's why you end up with these solutions that are packaged, and you go to the store, you buy them, you apply things to your face and your feet, or you go to a
Yeah.
spa or whatever, and you're like, all
Yeah.
right, like I did the thing that they said on the commercial. I'm supposed to feel like calm and revived and stuff. And you're like, I actually just have like stuff on my face. Like zero, it's all topical, right? Nothing on the inside of me, because the inside of me is really what feels like it's on fire right now.
Yeah.
And no face cream, no foot cream, no massage, no nothing that happens to the exterior is going to help. And
Yeah.
it's the community and the conversation and the connection piece that actually
Exactly.
helps.
Exactly. That correlation. I call it the 3 S's: shopping, scroll, and the sugar. Yeah. All of which are essentially disconnecting and numbing, right? And so, I mean, I'm not, I resort to that and I catch myself doing that, right? So I'm by no means saying that I don't indulge in any of these entirely or anything, but I think it's important to also realize that all of those are signs of, us being in like freeze, and, we like consuming our way to whatever it is, right? So then you start wondering, there is a lot of this whole industry, sometimes it feels like it's predicated on not just hyper independence, but also like disconnection. Because when I'm not good enough and I'm made to feel not good enough, I can be sold things and that's okay. But then I'm requiring that we disconnect, right, from our own selves or others. And we're told that we can do this by ourselves and all of that stuff. And those things are like, yeah, reaching for the sugar. And I do it too, right? But and the shopping, the scrolling, and that's like, you know, doing something to us in the numbing area, in the disconnecting area, right? And then
Hmm.
also the shopping, the impulse buying, right? And then we also, I think, yes, we buy physical products like that. Sometimes we also buy courses like that, right? And we just accumulate these courses that we never get to. And
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that
I mean,
momentary, like, oh, maybe this will help me. And then we never end up logging in, you know?
yeah. I think, yeah, that's, it's really important too, because saying like having, I think we don't acknowledge the individual needs in this space enough. And that idea of like, so my oldest is 12, and she is becoming more aware of these things. We've talked about this for a very long time. And I think that I may have mentioned this on the show before, but when we talk about these things like beauty and wellness and stuff like that, like stuff that you see commercials for on TV, it's like a cream that is going to fix your face in 3 weeks or less, but you use it for like one, right? And so when she sees these commercials, she's like, what is this? And I'm like, pay it. I'm sure that there's a lot of things out there, a lot of products in the market that are helpful. And I'm not anti this. I am saying, let's think about the messaging here. The commercials start with telling you there's something wrong with you. It's
Correct.
like that. It's like that real crappy non-friend person who you can't get out of your life who's like, oh, by the way, I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone told you, but I'm just going to help you with this. And you're like, I didn't need that. Like that was unnecessary roughness in the cognitive and emotional sense. And then in that commercial, they tell you, this is the solution that you need. I am the only person that can sell you the solution. So after you buy my solution and you use my solution, you will then be happy, calm, fulfilled, loved, popular, like all of these things. And I'm like, a cream or a pill or a powder or whatever it is cannot change your life like that.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that like, if, you're like, oh, I don't want to feel that way. Do people really not, do they see me like this or whatever? I'm gonna bring this thing into my house and into my life or onto my body or whatever it is. And then once I do that, it will be fine. And I'm like, no thanks. So we
Yeah.
talk a lot about the messaging that
Yeah.
comes across.
Absolutely. I think it's very hard I'm raising a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old daughters who are sort of just understanding the whole body and it's extraordinary how much body shame is being piled on to little girls and probably boys as well. I don't know. But it's exactly what you said. The starting point is that you're not enough and your body is not enough and your brain is not enough. And then it's bad enough that we see this on the media, but it's constantly being enforced out there in all of these structures. And I think women, you know, globally have a very complicated relationship with our bodies because, I mean, there are entire industry, and I don't mean just, for example, in Asian cultures, Indian cultures, colonial trauma, right? White is might, fair skin is everything, right? So, like, there's a little, it's called kesar. It's saffron. So the idea is if you have saffron with warm milk every day during your pregnancy, your child will be born fair skinned. And it's not just Indians in India doing that. It's Indians who live globally that do that, right? Which because of the preoccupation with the fairer, lighter skin and, how there's internalized shaming and, judgment and all of that stuff that I think yeah, I mean, being a parent in these days and kind of just tell your child that, the most beautiful part of them is, their heart and their soul and, you know,
Yeah.
why you yourself, right? I do my eyebrows, right? So, and I wear makeup when needed. So, again, we're also navigating, eye wax, my leg, right? And so, like, yeah, it's like, where do you draw the line? And, it's a very complicated conversation, I feel like, the
Yeah.
ones that we have with our bodies and how we're constantly made to feel not enough. And the shame is so much that we disconnect from it. And, I think, it comes to bite us in many phases of our lives, but pregnancy, a lot of us go through that again, neck up, right, in the intellect and not really being tuned because we sort of outsource that to the doctor or the midwife or somebody else as the expert at the cost of not really being attuned with our body or our baby for that matter, because then we reduce it to a clinical event and a very logistical event, right? And I remember when I got pregnant, because that's what I saw my sisters and cousins do in the US, which is like I'll work up until the last day, so I save all my leave for when the baby comes, and all the logistics and clinical driven versus the more embodied thing, and how that creates a shift in how we bring how we're born and how our offspring are born. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you had this, like the tech piece and, had worked for these great companies and traveled and all of that stuff. And so when you had your first, is that when you transitioned? That's when you transitioned
That's
out
when I
of that.
transitioned. Yeah, I was still doing so. When I was pregnant with my first one, and right around the time we had her, I knew I wanted to do something else. So I started training, preparing, while I still had this job. So I had that overlap. And then we had our second one. So I was sort of building up my portfolio, right? So I was studying, getting certified, doing pro bono work to like hone my skills, that sort of thing. And then I had my second one. I was still doing that. And then I did go back after my second one. I actually switched jobs. I think a part of it was also that, I still got it and I wanted to prove to the world and everybody that, hey, I had two maternity breaks and, I still got it sort of thing. It was very much maybe, I mean, not very, yeah, part of it was also external validation seeking, right? And then when I got that big job, I was like, yay, the paycheck. And then, of course, I did it for, shorter than anticipated because, it was like, oh, okay, now I really can't do the two-track thing anymore, right? Because my heart's fully in it. And, I don't know, we had like mine 2 years, 2 months apart. And so it's very intense, that phase. And, one night I was at the hospital with my second one and, some respiratory illness and she was a few months old. And I was like, nah, I can't do this juggly thing and do this as a side hustle anymore. I just have to take the jump at this point. And yeah, that's what we did.
I love that. I love that. I mean, just that is it's a huge leap because like, as we were just talking about, like all the uncertainty, talk about like paycheck benefits, maternity leave, and then you jump into the squishy foundation because just like so many other people, right? What's known is not fitting to the level that seeking out the unknown and trying the unknown and taking a chance on that is much more appealing than knowing that what you're doing just actually fundamentally does not work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was the thing. And then you kind of try and push it and squish it and, try to do it for a while, right? I think that's one of and it takes a while. And again, there's also the element of like the immigration, the mortgage, the house, and, there's some logistical stuff, right? Because as an immigrant, you don't have any like that social benefits, right? So, that's a little bit of that, but I don't think that was a huge, because we were living in the UK, it was not that much of because we had a pretty straightforward path to citizenship and, that allowed us to, and we could start a company and vote. And, oh, actually, slight tangent, but I'm going to share this, that because we're talking immigration, I'm one of, I'm not the only one. You'll see a lot of people that are like 40s and 50s, have never voted in their life. That, for me, when I was in India, I was less than 18, so I couldn't vote or whatever, right? I was in college, whatever, and then spent years in the US, couldn't vote, whatever. And then I moved to the UK and I was still an Indian citizen, but there Commonwealth people can vote. And the idea of having a vote was extraordinary for me at 30, like 28, 30. The very first time was a police election in the school next to me. No idea who the candidates were, didn't care. I was like, whoa, I can cast my vote. And I went there and I voted. I don't know, this might seem like a silly thing, but like just being able to have a vote where you live is something that we take for granted, right? Most of the time, we don't kind of really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember that first time I was super excited that I could vote.
I mean, becoming the reason I became a U.S. citizen, I mean, there's many of them, but one of the reasons was I had never voted in my life.
Yeah.
So
So you get it. Yeah.
Last year I turned 40 and I had never voted in my life. I was 15 when I left Canada. I didn't submit any absentee ballots because I just didn't follow any of it. Whatever. But one of the reasons why is, everything that was sort of coming and all of that is I thought I can't do one more election where it feels like you're like waiting for everyone else to show up, right? Because the number of people that show up for federal elections is abysmal compared to other countries. And so I was like, I'm going to go through this process. And then at that point, Biden dropped out. Like
Yeah.
I had my interview. So Biden dropped out, Kamala stepped in. And so I had this really cool sort of path of like, I'm going to vote for the first time. I'm going to vote
Yes.
for a woman for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, and I was confirmed by a female judge, and the speaker at my citizenship was a woman. So it was like all these women who
Yeah.
had like risen up and done all of these things were kind
Yeah.
of like all around. And I was like, oh my gosh, like so excited. Like, and then you go to vote, and like, the aura around voting is so much bigger than the actual vote. Like you go in, you circle the box, like all the kids they all came with me, and they're all like in the little curtain thing. And you go and you hand the piece of paper in, and then you go to the bake sale that they're, selling cookies at. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is like the most exciting thing ever. Meanwhile, everyone else is like, oh, I got to get out of work and I got to go vote and I got to blah, 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 blah. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is the best. Like coming to America is happening
It's
right now.
my sister and their family are American, and she's here now. And this time she did it was the first time she's outside and voting through the paper. What do you call that? Postal vote.
The absentee ballot.
The
Yeah.
absentee ballot. And so she downloads it, and we all go there and we make a big deal out because the kids are excited, right? Mine are and hers are, and it's Kamala and all of that, right? So like we made I remember how excited it was, and she was printing it out and filling it out and then it's sending it in, and it was like we made a ceremony out of it.
I love it. I love it. It's awesome. Yeah, so I could talk about this forever because I just think like that's really fascinating. So when you transitioned into this somatic work and the doula work, how do people come into the fold with you?
Yeah.
Like how does that happen?
Yeah. So for my doula work, I spent quite a bit of time in maternity, and then I built back in the day when I was still in Britain and I was doing this. Online birth programs were not a thing before COVID. Online anything was not such a big, like service consumption online was really not a big thing before COVID, like for birth and stuff, especially in India. So I was building and launching birth programs, being based out of India. And then, at some point we moved and all of that. So that was the online piece. Birth work also here was tending to be very sort of, you had to be provider based. And so, with the hospital and everything was organic in my birth business, everything was organic because what happened was I used to go to birth conferences and meet people there, very cool people. They're like, hey, let's just, this conversation that we're having in the couch, let's just get online and do it on Instagram. And we used to, and that would like blow up. And I had no idea the first time it happened. The first time this happened was I had, I don't know, 100 people on Instagram, and I was going to shut it down because I come from Facebook and, okay, that's my age, right? Whatever. I'm like 42 and, whatever, right? I was transitioning from like Facebook to Instagram, and it was like 100 people, and I was like, no, I'm going to shut it down. And then my birth friend was like, hey, let's just go online and talk. It's a 20-minute conversation, and let's talk about good girls, bad births, and how, that good girl syndrome leads to women having traumatic birth experiences. Like, sure, and then we did, 15, 20 minutes. I got off, and then she calls me and she's like, what did we do? There are like tons of people being like, talk more, come back on, and let's do it. Let's Instagram live. And then we went for 2 hours, and then, yeah, it just snowballed, right? Like somebody's listening to it and they're like, hey, come hang out with me and we'll talk about this. And it was just very sort of organic, that business when I was in birth. The thematic stuff started more because of where I started with women around childbirth or after childbirth. And now it's grown to more entrepreneurs and women in leadership, and with or without, it does tend to be a part of it. But so it was more on that side. And now there's still trauma work, but the nervous system regulation is the underlying piece. And if we don't do that well and we try and go into trauma, then you're going to re-traumatize the system and you're going to exacerbate existing responses, right? So my work is, sort of in that intersection. I have a presence on LinkedIn, and, so I get, that's one of the things. And I hang out at podcasts. I do a little bit of outbound sort of, work, but it's mainly like, social media. And then people book calls with me. We talk about whether it's the right fit. And then we go from there. I think it's very intimate, this work too. And so it feels
Mhm.
like, people feel like by the time they come to me, they've already read all my emails, maybe followed my posts, seen me or heard me on podcasts, that sort of thing. Yeah. I am experimenting with a very low entry point in Facebook ads. So I've started experimenting with it, and it's a new way of working for me because I come
Mhm.
from a very B2B sort of background, right? So I was doing B2C like B2B, right? So it took me a while to kind of make that shift because you're directly talking with end users, and that's a very different game. And I used to feel a little cringy, to write
Mhm.
those, like, simple sort of low point salesy stuff. But now I've found a way to be authentic while I do it. I understand how the whole cold to warm sort of thing works. And, I'm experimenting with that. I'm getting a hang of it now. Like, so you have to make it your own, right? Like, I feel like you have to make it your own too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And especially, the transition that the business has gone through, going from primarily around birth to
Yeah.
now you're moving in that. But I love that you've woven so many experiences professionally and personally into it, because I feel like that's like when you sit in on an Instagram live or something like that, you can tell like when the person is sitting there reading the cards, and you can tell when the person is sitting there just talking about their experience. I love the title Good Girls Bad Birth. And how are you still doing things of that nature? Like do you still
I'd
go
love
on?
to. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
mind talking about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interconnected, right? So, like, a lot of like my audience are women in 25 to 45 for whom it's either happened or it's about to happen, that sort of thing, right? Most of my clients tend to be either mothers or want to become mothers, or at least curious about becoming mother, like where motherhood is, there's some curiosity around it, right? There are outliers, but this is the main kind of majority. And so there is no somatic work without it gets to the birth eventually, right? A lot of times the birth itself then influences how the person wants to show up, career wise, or location wise, whatever it is. So it does get there, the birth, and not that all of it, every birth is traumatic, and not that, but sometimes there is residual anxiety from the reproductive process itself, whether it's trying. So that is a special, that is a big part of how we do it. Again, the uncertainty wise, right? So if you're trying and for a long time, a lot of things are depending on something and it's not happening in the way it's in, that's its own pattern and uncertainty. And it shows up in women feeling like they even with the birth is that caught between attachment and feminism is what I call it. Feeling like, I want to be an attachment parent and I want to build secure attachment, and that's on one side. And then there is the, especially like, as an immigrant, you're probably the first or second generation of women that are educated and have jobs and careers, right? So you feel like you have something to prove there. And if you watch like mother or grandmother being done in because of the lack of financial independence, that is survival for you, right? So I can't let go of that. However, I feel like I need to provide the child secure attachment and caught in the loop. And entrepreneurship is a great sort of, not the only remedy, but that's a good way time to start exploring, you know,
Yeah.
entrepreneurship as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, it all makes sense too, having this like I think that when people talk about entrepreneurship, it's this idea of like, lunch dates and like living it up and stuff like that. And so I do love that when you talk about it, you're talking about like it is a viable option, but it's not a simple viable option. It
No,
is
it's
it
not.
is it's an uphill climb
Yeah.
to get to that. And so even in your own experience of like going through pregnancy, working full time and also starting that on the side, like that that's a lot of value add to someone who's reaching out to sort of learn more about what that process could look like. I love that.
Or whichever path it takes, I suppose. But you're right, it's not glamorous. It's more like you, right? Like you built this business primarily by yourself, right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
I
me
check
too.
all
Like
those
small.
immigrant boxes. Check all.
Yeah.
I mean, not the education piece, but like I check all those boxes. I'm the oldest daughter, so like I
Yeah.
mean, we come with our
Yes.
own luggage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it feels like, oh my God, I've hustled so much, and I need to, how do I survive, and all of that going on, I suppose. Yeah. But yeah, I think so. I mean, if anybody wants to reach out, go to my website, you can book a call with me and let's chat. And then, yeah, I think it's just one of the reasons why I built out my own modality is because there wasn't anything like it before. Like, and I had, sort of certified in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like being learn it all. I have to do check the boxes and study and go through all the things, and that was useful, don't get me wrong, right? All of that, but nothing really spoke to this. I feel like
Yeah.
maybe it's like an extraordinary micro niche, but my women are deep thinkers and deep feelers, and I feel like there's a big analytical side, right? Like I'm sure for you also, like there's a very like sort of analytical, logical side, and then there's also this empathy and I want to make a difference, that side. And I feel like there was nothing that really acknowledged both sides,
Mm-hmm.
because telling a brain like that just to slow down or calm down, or, it's not necessarily going to work because there's 30 tabs up there,
Yeah.
Right?
No, I love it.
Right?
I think it's brilliant because I think that's what when you get somebody that has this background, not necessarily an immigration one, but someone that that sort of is like a foot on the gas all the time, that you can't slow when you do slow down, then the feelings catch up, right? Like you're driving 100 and the feelings are going 75. You slow down, all of a sudden it's like you get rear-ended by these feelings and you're like, I do not have the
It's
tools.
too
I guess I'll
much.
just, yeah, I guess I'll
Yeah.
just hit the gas and like run, see if
Yeah.
I can outrun these. And that's just it's not
Exactly.
viable.
Exactly. And actually, slowing down itself can be a trigger. See, so
Mhm.
anything that is novel lands as threat on the nervous system. Therefore, and that's why we need to work with a practitioner, and self healing or self trauma work or whatever, the books, podcasts, apps only get us so far, because if you overcook the slowing down or the being in the body. See, imagine body's been an alien place and you've lived your life neck up and intellectual and thinking of whatever, right? And then you're like, oh, you have to be in the body, and that is a very alien place. And therefore, this is why we work with co-regulation and safety in the presence of a practitioner, because this is about precision, right? You almost want to microdose it, right? So
Mhm.
like titrate, like the chemistry lab, right? And
Mhm.
then microdose it. And then over a period of time, neurons that wire together will fire together, right? And so when I say slow, it's not that the transformation is slow, but the microdosing has to happen at a certain pace in order to allow for the more nonlinear gains. Because once that wiring happens, you're going to see like those quantum sort of, you know, changes and transformation. But, yeah, I mean, you come to me or somebody like me for that precision.
Yeah.
Because when you start the work, compliments can be triggering, noticing anything good can be triggering, slowing down can be triggering, right? Because the nervous system is like danger, 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 because this is new,
Mhm.
right? And that's why you need somebody who can do it in a kind of nuanced, precise sort of way.
I love it. Well, I'll put all of your links in the show notes because I think that there are a lot of people out there that even if they don't necessarily hear and say, "Oh yes, I check every one of those boxes," I think there's a lot of there's a big continuum of people that may not necessarily live in the extreme end of something, but that you don't need to run out to the end of the road before you ask for help. And I love that it's built around, I love that it's built around community. And so,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. And like you said, you don't have to tick all the boxes. I do have this South Asian somatics, and immigration and, the nuances of that. However, like I said, when I speak about some of these, I always get women that are like, hey, I don't tick all these particular boxes, but everything you said resonates with me and I really need this. And so, by being specific, you're also more broad, and I do have a global, cohort of women who just find this like organically, and some men too, to be honest, not in the group, but in one-on-one work, much fewer, obviously, but, when it resonates, it just resonates, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that.
Men tend to stay longer because I think...
Because of the co-regulation?
Because there's a geeky part to me, right? So a lot of the work, and this is both men and women, right? I'm not saying it's maybe gender specific, but you start with sort of the neuroscience behind it and the logic behind it. Sometimes that's an attraction, like that don't necessarily see in the couples therapy or talk therapy that they may have been to before. So that's one, I guess. And longer because it's like, okay, this is good, this is working, I
like it here.
Yeah, I like it here.
It's awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining me today. I think it's really fascinating to pull like big themes together and see how that all can integrate on really a micro level. And when you're talking about changes, starting micro I love that concept. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. It was lovely to talk to you. And thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Oh, thank you.